Doing a tux for off the record, Isaac?
Yeah, like I was telling Noah, I'd never worn the bow tie before, so I thought, it was time to bust it out in his honorable presence.
Hold on, I'm sorry, guys. I can't hear anything. Just give me a sec.
He missed the whole compliment.
We're off to a great start.
Okay, I can. Okay,
Hello?
I can hear
Hello?
you guys now. Perfect.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah, there we go. And now you're trying to. Thank you, Andrew.
I was like, wait, I can't hear anyone now. What's going on?
Oh God.
All right, let's get this train wreck started. Hello and welcome to Off the Record. This is the Friday confab. We take a regular cast of characters from True North. We mix it up, but they're all familiar faces or voices, and we try to unpack the week that was, talk about some of our top stories of the week, the oddball stuff we didn't get to, and basically whatever else comes to mind. Joining me, I'm Andrew Lawton, by the way. Hi, good to see you. Thanks for coming. Joining me once again are Isaac Lamoureux, who you see at tnc.news and also here on the Daily Brief, as well as Noah Jarvis, for whom the same description applies. But Isaac, Noah, welcome. Good to have you both here. How was your week?
I was doing well, and glad to be able to actually hear you this time. But yeah, doing good.
How are things where you are, Isaac? Because I know you're not that far from Jasper. Have you had any of the kind of the smoke and ash in Edmonton?
Actually, I had to drive to my mom's place downtown yesterday, and my eyes were just bugging me so much. I was like, I need some Visine, and then I looked in the sky and I was like, I can barely see anything. Like, I mean, it was so smoky. It wasn't like a fog or anything, but just that my vision was cloudy in that sense. So yeah, we're definitely feeling the effects of the fire here, but certainly nowhere near what's happening in Jasper.
No, it's been tragic. I remember I was out in Banff, I was in Calgary. I think I was in Calgary and Banff a few years back when there were wildfires in BC, and it really is astonishing because it's not really something I get in Southern Ontario. It's astonishing just how much that travels, like how much the smell travels and the ash travels. And it's the one, I know you were in Alberta recently, Noah. It's the one thing that's like always weird when you experience, but what's happening in Jasper has been absolutely terrible. We try to keep things light on this show, so we aren't going to go into the wildfire situation here. But we do have reporting on it at True North, and I would encourage people to take a look at Danielle Smith's press conference yesterday. She was incredibly, incredibly moved, as I know a lot of people in Alberta are, by what's been happening there and just the devastation on that. But that's as dark as we'll get things on this episode for now. I do want to go into this story, which came up, and I find it to be a bit of an interesting one. So we covered immigration a lot at True North. It was really our foundational issue back when Candace Malcolm launched the organization, because she saw that no one else in the country was really having a grown-up conversation on immigration. And we have seen the Liberal government just completely trample all over the immigration system. They've trampled all over now the immigration consensus that Canadians used to have, that immigration was a really positive thing for the country, that it was adding to the cultural fabric, the economic fabric, all of these things. And one of the issues about which I warned and Candace Malcolm warned and other people warned quite some time ago was that when the Liberal government stops taking things in this system seriously, it turns Canadians against immigrants. And it's not to justify that. It's just a statement of fact. And that's exactly what's happening now. A new poll shows that 60% of Canadians say Canada is admitting too many immigrants. They feel, the poll says, like it's the highest on record in the century. This is, I think, an incredibly, incredibly damaging statistic, because when you have Canadians that start to view that, and by the way, the Liberals have effectively acknowledged this is the case when they talk about, in Trudeau's eyes, bringing in more than we could absorb or beyond what Canada could absorb. But it means that Canadians are likely to overreact and say that we need perhaps fewer than the country could sustain. And you pointed out something, Isaac, before we were on air that I think was interesting, that even this is based on a perception that is in and of itself an inaccurate assessment, is it not?
Yeah, and that's whenever, I mean, obviously there's a lot of polls that have been coming out recently on immigration. And the first thing I always do when reading an article or a poll about immigration is I say, okay, did they preface their questions with Canada immigrates X amount of people per year? And in large, it's always the same 500,000 per year sum, which we know is inaccurate, as Candace Malcolm previously reported with True North. The Liberals obviously brought in 2.3 million people in 2023 when you account for permanent residents, international students, temporary foreign workers, and all the different avenues of immigration, illegal immigration included, a number which has been on the rise. So when we see staggering numbers of widespread disapproval of Canada's immigration plan based on the 500,000 number, you can only imagine what it would be if we were talking with the real digits in the multi-millions.
You're right. These numbers often get separated out, and people focus only on the permanent resident number, which is an important number. But you also have to look at international student visas. You have to look at temporary foreign workers, because you're still bringing in new people into the country. And in some cases, people are coming in for, a period of time. But, often that period of time is 3-4 years, especially for student visas. So in the end, you have a massively ballooning immigration cohort in Canada, and it's not being captured by the official data. So, Noah, it's no surprise the Canadians are saying, hey, maybe it's a little bit too much.
No, absolutely. I mean, to have an immigration system that maintains the support of the common people, you need to have, the public, being involved in the process. And when the public tells you that we're bringing in too many people, the government has to respond to those concerns. And the Trudeau government, they clearly have not responded to those concerns. Sure, the immigration minister has said that they're going to reduce the amount of foreign students that they're bringing into the country, but statistics show that the rate at which we are admitting foreign students to this country has stayed the same since years past, or has even increased slightly. So when we're bringing in excess amount of foreign students that are coming into our universities basically to help prop them up and to help finance them because they are kind of struggling, and when we're bringing in permanent residents and we're bringing in temporary foreign workers who are potentially taking jobs that other Canadians can take, they're taking low wage jobs that a lot of Canadian youth who would normally take up these jobs, for example, working at a Tim Hortons or at a grocery store. My first job was at a grocery store, and that was a really good stepping stone for me to be able to go on to better, bigger and better things. So a lot of young Canadians are being denied that. A lot of just Canadians in general are seeing that they are having a harder time being able to find jobs, being able to find a house to live in, and be able to find an affordable house to live in. So when all these factors are taken into consideration, the Canadian people are obviously going to turn against the immigration system, and that did not have to. It did not have to be this way. The Trudeau government could have, brought in about maybe half as much as people as they've brought in, and you focus on economic policies that would help this country flourish, whether that be focusing on expanding home building and whatnot. But instead, they've done the opposite. They focus on ratcheting up immigration to artificially boost our GDP, and Canadians are suffering for that, and sentiment against immigration is rising because of it.
And I have the previous numbers here from 2023, which was 500,000 permanent residents, 660,000 temporary foreign workers, 900,000 international students, and just under 144,000 illegal immigrants. So that was for a total of 2.2 million people, yes,
Wow.
in 2023.
No, that's massive, and I think the issue is that it's not like people want to claim that criticism of immigration is a moral judgment. That if someone criticizes the immigration system, it's because you're racist, or it's because you're making some moral position against immigration. A lot of this is a numerical issue, and this is what Conservative leader Pierre Poilievre was talking about when he said we need to tie immigration numbers to available housing, available jobs, capacity in the social services sector, because a lot of the stuff is just a matter of math. And if you're not able to serve your existing citizens and residents or the immigrants because there's nowhere for them to live, they can't affordably buy a house, they can't find a job, then you're not helping anyone, are you?
Yeah, for
No,
me,
not
it's
at
not.
all. I mean, go ahead.
Start with you,
Okay.
Isaac.
Thanks. For me, it's definitely mathematical. What comes to mind is obviously Alberta announced educational funding just a few days ago, which Education Minister Nicolaides said was a very abnormal to happen outside of a budget cycle. And they said, look, this is because so many people came to Alberta. Our schools are overflowing. We don't have enough teachers. They need money. If we don't provide it to them, we're looking at students who don't have a classroom to learn. I mean, you can't imagine a worse scenario in a society than no education for children, realistically. And I mean, the same could be said for hospitals, any publicly funded resource where we can only support so many new individuals.
Okay, go ahead, Noah.
Yeah, I mean, Isaac brings up the fact that our social services are being strained. You even look at the healthcare system, in which waiting times have not gotten any better. If you lived in Canada in the past 10 years, you know that waiting times have never been never been a strong point in our healthcare system, and they're only getting worse because more and more people are coming to the country. They're increasingly coming from countries in which they don't have as great, as say healthcare systems as in Canada. They don't have the same standards of health and wellness in Canada, so they come and they increasingly need healthcare services, and that crowds out other people who would otherwise require them. And if you want to retain support for an immigration system, having your grandmother be denied quick access to treatment because a bunch of people who just came to this country also need healthcare services. Well, you're not going to actually win people over like that. And if you look at a country like the United States, where they have different immigration problems, but when government bureaucrats, when politicians decide to ignore the concerns of their people, you get a sort of anti-immigration sentiment, that is very strong in the United States. And we didn't have that until recently. So this is really all the fault of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. And it's really, my hope that a conservative government will have the stomach to be able to come in, slash immigration, not, completely dismantle the immigration system, because we still need it, but to slash immigration to a point in which, it would help to ameliorate our problems with be able to deliver social services and to be able to access affordable housing. Because if not, we're really going to see some problems. Perhaps the PPC will even rise in their support because these immigration concerns are not being addressed.
Yeah, and there's been, I mean, we've done this. I don't know if you did it, Isaac, or if it was our colleague Quinn. I think it might have been Quinn that did a report not that long ago on what's called onward migration, which is people that come to Canada as immigrants, then they just, decide, this isn't for me, and then they go somewhere else. And onward immigration or onward migration has apparently been on the rise, because you have immigrants that come to the country and realize that this dream that they thought would be in Canada is not there for them. And how could it be? Because the dream for Canadians is not there for people born in this country right now. So if we can't even find housing for lifelong Canadians who at 24, 25 would love to set out on their own, we're not going to be able to find it for anyone else. And there's nothing racial about that. It's just a fact of life. I would love nothing more than to be able to accommodate anyone who wants to be in Canada that is willing to live the Canadian life and exhibit Canadian values and contribute to the economy and contribute to society. But if we can't do that, we shouldn't pretend we can.
Yeah, I didn't write that article about onward migration, but I have read similar polls. One that comes to mind is one I wrote a few months ago about recent immigrants, those who immigrated to Canada within the last decade. Yet 42% of them were among the voices saying the immigration in this country is too high, despite having just themselves recently immigrated to the country. So obviously they're coming here and like, immigration's terrible. Yeah.
Immigration, yeah.
Oh, it'd be great if I were the last immigrant, But yeah so.
It's funny you mentioned that, because I met someone years ago who came to Canada from China, and they went to Vancouver, and they hated it because they're like, there are too many Chinese people here. This is what they said to me. And then they moved to Markham, which has also an insane amount of Chinese people, and they said there were too many. And he was saying this to me, and I was so bad, because I'm like, no one would ever in their right mind say these things out loud. But that was an attitude that he had. And I was thinking, like, well, you wanted something in the country that, you thought Canada would offer. You can't begrudge these people too, but there are attitudes among certain immigrant communities like that are part of this. I mean, when we look at this poll that we were talking about in the National Post, 60% of Canadians say Canada is admitting too many immigrants. A lot of those, I suspect, are people who immigrated to Canada themselves. In fact, it's possible that disproportionately they make up a share of it, because often it's immigrants to the country that have a greater sense of pride in the country than a lot of others do, because they chose to be Canadian. They chose this life. And I think Canadians have often been a bit complacent about this. I don't know. What's your thought, Noah, before we move on here?
No, you're absolutely right. I recently had a Uber ride coming back home from Toronto, and I had a Indian Uber driver who said he was in Canada for about 20 to 30 years, and he was talking to me about all this damn immigration, that Trudeau, all these immigrants that was bringing in. I just kind of just sit back and listen. He's like, we're bringing in too many people from India who don't want to come to Canada and become Canadian. We're bringing in too many people from India who are treating it like they're still living in New Delhi or something like
This
that.
is
And
what
I was
your
just
Indian
listening.
Uber driver said.
Yeah, that's what he was
Huh.
telling me. He's like, I've been in this country for 20 plus years, and they want to come and ruin immigration for everyone. And he is absolutely right. I'm a third generation immigrant. My grandmother, both of my grandmothers on both sides of my family came to this country in the 70s, and they're not really happy with the current state of the immigration system. My dad, second generation immigrant, not really happy with the current state of our immigration system. So when you have immigrants or sons and daughters of immigrants who are trying to tell the Canadian government, trying to tell people that the current immigration system is broken, and you don't have a government that is responding to those concerns. Well, attitudes towards immigration in general is going to drop significantly.
All right. Well, thank you for that, Noah. We'll move on to the next topic, which I've completely forgotten. So let me find my notes here. Oh, it's actually your topic, Noah. So this one, I'm just going to take a step back and just let you guys handle this one because it's about the Olympics in some way, which I'm told is a sporting event that is taking place. So Noah, take it away.
I know you're sportingly illiterate, Andrew, but
Last week I
hopefully our
learned about
audience.
Vibes Cartel, the I don't know R&B singer rapper. Anyway, today I'll learn about soccer.
You learn about this foreign sport, soccer. But yeah, no. Right now, Canada's women's team are trying to go back to back at the Olympics. They're trying to win another gold medal because they won the gold medal at the Tokyo Olympics back in 2021. However, a wrench has been thrown in the soccer team's ability to win because it was discovered that an assistant coach and a member of Team Canada's staff had been trying to spy on a rival team. That is right. They were trying to spy on the New Zealand women's national team practices with a drone. So, first of all, this is stupid because the Paris authorities, they already had banned drones in Paris for the duration of the Olympics because they know that, people are going to try to spy. So what does a clever Canadian assistant coach and a team, I guess, analyst do? They go out, they buy a drone, they go outside of the New Zealand national team soccer practice and fly a drone over their practice to try and record what they are doing, and they get caught. In New Zealand, not only did happen one time, this happened twice. The New Zealand national team reported that not only did they see this drone flying over their practice on July 22nd, but they also saw this on July 19th. So the second time that it happened, they promptly alerted the authorities. A man named Joseph Lombardi, who is an accredited member of Canada's women's team support staff. He was arrested, questioned, released, and Team Canada is now sending Lombardi and also an assistant coach named Jasmine Mander, who is also involved in the plot to spy on the New Zealand national team's soccer practices. They've been sent home and they've been removed from the team. It is obviously a national embarrassment that we feel that we need to spy on the New Zealanders. I mean, what do they have in New Zealand? Like they just got it's basically Australia Junior, and we're a better country than Australia. I feel like so. I don't know why we need to spy on them, but it just goes to show that uh, Canada is not in a great place right now. What do you guys think of this story?
So I'll just jump in with a question here, which either you, Noah, or you, Isaac, can answer. Because again, I don't understand too much about soccer. I understand there's a ball and two nets, and that's the extent of it. So it's not a play. It's not a sport like football that has plays, and I'm not even aware of like a real strategic component to soccer. And I don't mean that in a negative way. So, like, what advantage do you even get from watching a team practice soccer?
It's a it's a
Well,
good question,
you can add,
and
you can answer this.
yeah, they might have like various oddball set plays that might happen once a game. Like if a certain person gets a ball in a certain portion of the field, they're going to try and execute something. But primarily, soccer's a possession game wherein you pass the ball around for 30 minutes and then eventually get a good shot off, which is why it's never interested me too much. It's very slow possession-based game, at least.
I'm just imagining the like the great details that the Canadian spies got. It's so they try to put the ball in the net when they have it.
But I don't think you're that wrong in that sense. Where obviously, like
I feel like soccer isn't like the sport to really cheat on. When there's that plot by the New England Patriots football team, Andrew, just so you know,
I
there's
know
a plot
I
by
know
like the
about
New England
Deflategate.
Patriots. Like,
I know about Tom Brady's deflated balls. That's the one thing I know about football because they
do you
make
know
jokes about it.
Spygate?
Oh, I didn't know, but darn it.
Well,
Here I
there's
was
also
trying to be all indignant that I know, but I actually have no idea what
exactly.
you're
There
talking
you go,
about now.
Andrew.
All right, fine.
But
Let
there's this
me
thing
know about
called
Spygate.
Spygate where they try to recording the other team. They basically the other team's coaches or whatever to see like what plays they were calling. And obviously that's enormously beneficial. So I don't really know like what the equivalent of that would be in soccer. I'm not a big soccer guy. I'm more of a basketball guy. But at the end of the day, I feel like any sort of advantage that you can get, whether that's like knowing which players are going to start and which players are going to be subbed in, what formation they're going to use, what sort of uh, people I guess they're going to play through, whether that's going to be the center midfielders or on the wings. I guess that's the sort of thing that they want to figure out. But even that didn't work out well. It's like the one sport where spying isn't going to grant you a massive tactical advantage is the sport that they decided to go out and do some spying operations. So I think it's just pretty embarrassing, as a Canadian who kind of cares about Canadian sports teams doing well. Although I don't know, Andrew, does this affect your sense of national pride?
No. Someone
Oh
told me
man.
the other day that I think it's like the Toronto Star or something has a newsletter where you can like subscribe to get an email alert the minute that a Canadian wins a medal. And I'm like, I get enough emails. I don't need just give me the medal tally at the end of it or so, and I'll figure it out there. I did hear that breakdancing is in the Olympics is it the first time?
I don't follow the Olympics that heavily. I mean, I don't know why.
You wrote the
Yeah.
story that we're talking about.
Yeah, but I didn't write
All
the
right,
breakdancing
let me look up
story.
if it's the first year for breakdancing.
While
I
you're
thought it
looking that up,
was.
I'll just give some background on one of the sports where spying has actually been extremely relevant and probably more relevant than any other sport, of course, which is baseball. That being stealing signs, because obviously every pitch comes with a sign designating what the pitch will be, and some pitchers can throw up to 10 different pitches. So obviously that makes a huge difference. And in 2019, news of the Houston Astros cheating in 2017 and 2018 dropped. They were using illegal video technology to steal signs from other teams, which was interesting when I was thinking whether this, I was asked whether the soccer team would repeat their gold medal performance. And of course, the Astros won the World Series in 2017. And then the news broke in 2019, but they returned to the World Series in 2019 and 21, losing both times, but then they won again in 2022. So obviously the news of the Astros, and none of them got punished or the World Series went take away or anything of the sort, didn't affect their performance in any way.
All right, there we go. We got all the trivia. Okay, so let's move on to this story, Isaac, which is one of yours. Goes back to Alberta. Now, I had actually forgotten about this discussion because this came up when Danielle Smith was running for the UCP leadership and ultimately the premiership. But now it sounds like she's making good in part on a promise that goes back to a very turbulent time in Alberta politics.
Yeah, so Smith is basically following through with one of her campaign pledges here, and she's saying that the fall update to the province's Bill of Rights will protect Albertans' personal medical decisions, including the right to refuse a vaccine. So this pledge initially came during a recent town hall in Bonnyville, attended by about 300 UCP members, where Smith also discussed strengthening Albertans' liberties and freedoms, lowering taxes, protecting the province from federal overreach, and improving healthcare, all things you'd expect from her. But then Smith confirmed the plans in a statement to True North where she said, quote, "In the fall, we will be introducing legislation to amend Alberta's Bill of Rights. Several amendments are being considered to strengthen Albertans' individual and property rights, including an amendment to guarantee Albertans the right to accept or refuse a medical treatment." So yeah, as you mentioned, Andrew, before becoming premier in 2022, Smith initially pledged to amend the Alberta Human Rights Act, which would prohibit employers from firing anyone based on their vaccination status. But those were scrapped after she was elected. And she also promised to ban post-secondary institutions from imposing vaccine mandates on students. At the time, she said that any Albertan who lost their job for basically declining to take a vaccine was a, quote, human rights violation. However, it was realized after the fact that the Public Health Act takes precedence over all laws except the Alberta Bill of Rights. So her initial plans to amend the Alberta Human Rights Act wouldn't have done anything, basically. And obviously, one of her first actions when she was elected was to fire all 11 members of the Alberta Health Services Board, including the Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Dina Hinshaw, who, as any Albertan will remember, advised former Premier Jason Kenney to implement vaccine mandates, to close schools, close churches, and then they sent officers to those areas to ensure that they were complying. And just for the last point here, many people may remember this, which was during Smith's first press conference as premier, she said that the unvaccinated had experienced the most discrimination of any group in her lifetime. And I'll refresh your memory on a quote from Justin Trudeau in French. So there's a bit of different wording depending on where you're reading it, but he said something along the lines of, quote, "There are also people who are fiercely opposed to vaccination, who don't believe in science, who are often misogynistic, often racist too. It's a small group, but it takes up space." And then he went on to say, "Do we tolerate these people?" So yeah, I mean, a lot of information in there, obviously, but what do you guys feel about Smith finally following through with one of her initial campaign promises to protect the unvaccinated from being fired by their employers?
Well, I think it's interesting because in a lot of ways, and even in Alberta to some extent, there's just been a desire to move on from it, to accept that this is in the past. Now, in some provinces, it's not. Alberta, or BC rather, still has vaccine mandates for healthcare workers. Alberta has moved on. I mean, all the mandates have been repealed. And I think Danielle Smith becoming the premier was a pretty strong rebuke of what a lot of people, including conservatives especially, were frustrated about in Jason Kenney's government. So I think it's good to know that she hasn't forgotten that that is an issue, and that at some point in the future, there could be another government that would say, hey, we want to mandate this, we want to impose this. And I think she's saying pretty decisively here, no, this is something that we will not stand for as a province. Now, look, it's a simple act of legislation. It's not like the Constitution, which means that theoretically, if a future government did want to do it, they could still change that law, but they would have to go through that process of doing it. And they would have to stare voters in the face and say, we are taking away this right you have to medical autonomy. So I think it's a very strong move from Danielle Smith, and probably in part because she's trying to make sure that her base doesn't forget, or that her base still supports her, that her base remains in her corner.
Yeah, I think you bring up a good point about the base because any first minister in Canada, whether you're a premier or a prime minister, you have to be able to feed the base. I think one of the problems with the Harper government is that he didn't, sufficiently feed the base. You see a lot of discontent with Doug Ford because he definitely doesn't want to do anything for his base. He only really wants to do anything that keeps him in power. And the thing that got Jason Kenney deposed is that he wasn't doing anything that the base wanted. He talked about the summer of fun and the summer of happiness, and then lockdowns a few weeks later or something like that. So when you're not attentive to the needs and wants of your base, they're going to get rid of you. And especially in a political culture like Alberta, where there isn't a lot of regard for premiers and leaders of political parties if your name is not Ralph Klein. So I think that Premier Smith pushing on this issue is a good thing to keep those people who are starting to get a little discontent with Premier Smith having to do premier like things, ribbon cuttings, and talking to mayors of big cities that like Calgary with Jody Gondek, who she probably has to work with, but it's not good optics for the base. So I think doing this for the base is a good thing. My one concern will be that I think that adding things to the Alberta Bill of Rights will, especially things that are a bit more frivolous, will lead to future governments, perhaps a future NDP government, adding things that conservatives do not like. I think once you open the door to exempting or adding, say, a vaccine as vaccine status as a protected status under the Bill of Rights, you might get the NDP coming in and adding transgenderism or the right to be able to access transgender healthcare as a youth. It's a slippery slope that you don't want to sort of give the other side ideas how to sort of abuse that power. But all in all, I think that I agree with the policy, and people being discriminated against vaccines isn't exactly something that we care for at True North. That's for sure.
Yeah, so I would agree with that. My sense would be that effectively we're looking at constitutions and bills of rights should be broad for that reason. And not to get too boring, because I'm the one that always says we have to keep things light on Off the Record, but you want these things to be negative liberties where you're trying to protect against the government doing something rather than to guarantee something. So the charter is really meant to constrain government. It's not meant to constrain Canadians. And I think the same should be true of a Bill of Rights. So you're right. There is a risk, though, that once you start just tacking things onto this, that it becomes a tool where any other government can start trying to manufacture these rights. So I think these things should be done sparingly. I know this is part of a broader update. It's not like the government's just going in to make this one change, which I think is an important part of this. But I think you raise a valid issue there, a valid possible issue. Just keeping with the theme of Alberta, Noah, you had this story this week, which was phenomenal. So we've seen all sorts of examples across the country of activists trying to take down statues and monuments and murals and rewrite history. And there's yet another example of this at the University of Alberta. Take it away.
Yeah, so there is this mural in the library of the University of Alberta. It is called the Alberta History mural, also known as the Glyde mural, because it was painted by a renowned artist named Henry George Glyde back in 1951. He helped to establish the Fine Arts Department in the University of Alberta in 1946, and he is just an influential artist in his own right. And he drew a image of basically Alberta's pioneer history and the history of Christian missionary work in Alberta. If you see the mural, you have Father Lacombe on the right, and you have another Christian missionary, George McDougall, on the left, and they're seen sort of preaching to a group of Indigenous people as some teepees are in the background. You see a church in the background, and in the very back, you see Fort Edmonton, old Fort Edmonton. This is really supposed to be a mural to help commemorate Alberta's history, and it's not a mural to denigrate the Indigenous people. In fact, back in 1951, to put Indigenous people in such a prominent place on a mural in a public library like the University of Alberta's, it was a groundbreaking thing. This was not something that was done back in those sort of backwards times. However, nowadays, you have activists, anti-colonial, anti-racist, those sort of types who are trying to reinterpret what this mural is actually supposed to be. They're trying to say that the Glyde mural is some sort of racist monument that needs to be torn down. And anytime someone walks by this mural, especially if they're of Indigenous ancestry, they're just filled with hatred, and they're like victimized or something like that. Even though you have a Indigenous professor who came out in opposition to destroying and removing the mural. There's a Indigenous professor at the in the Department of Fine Arts named Tanya Harnett, who said that, quote, rather than destroying the mural, a didactic panel is needed, one that gives context to this complex subject matter. And she's right. This is, a complex subject. There was some terrible things that were done to the Indigenous people in Canada, and during the process of colonialization. But at the end of the day, this mural is not a depiction of glorifying conquering the indigenous peoples. It is instead, depicting two Christian missionaries doing missionary work and helping to introduce Christianity to peoples who had not known Christianity. And you do have communities of indigenous Christians around Canada who I would assume would reject the tearing down of this mural. But we've seen this before. We've seen the left try and tear down statues. They've tried, whenever they are, trying to protest environmental issues, they put pasta sauce on, very historic pieces of art. So this is, a trend that has been going on for about a decade or so now, but it seems as if there's some pushback toward this mural being taken down. But what is your guys' thoughts on this issue?
Yeah, just I don't know. The
You're
first
dressed
thing
like an art critic, Isaac, so you have to take this
I
one.
know, I'm like, hey, my
Yeah.
uncle lives in Lacombe, but I'm hardly a historian, so I don't know if it was named after that missionary. But yeah, just maybe thinking of the last story, even in regard to legislative protection. I mean, maybe there has to be, and I'm not normally someone to advocate for additional bureaucracy in any sense, but maybe there has to be some further protections against historical destruction, let's call it. I mean, erasing of history really is what many of these examples are, wherein not just woke ideologues, but any extremist or other group could try and rewrite history, if you will, to make it more to their liking. Which, I mean, look, history was a terrible thing in many points in time, but it's there so that we can learn from it and grow as a society. So if we erase that in any way, I mean, we're really shooting ourselves in the foot here, because the most important thing that history serves to be is a lesson for modern and future societies. So I really, I don't know whether either of you have any ideas on how some sort of protections could be implemented, especially in the scholarly setting, because we've seen so many of these occurrences happen at university or colleges. But I don't know. What do you guys think about that?
Well, I mean, the problem is that if you have two choices between take the thing down or destroy the thing and add interpretive panels or additional context to it, I'll obviously pick that. But even that, I feel, is coming oftentimes from a negative place, because it starts from the baseline position that history is something we need to apologize for. I mean, art is reflecting a lot of things. It reflects the artist's view of a circumstance, and it reflects the circumstance itself. I mean, remember, the Last Supper is not a depiction of the Last Supper as itself. It's a depiction of the Last Supper as envisioned by Leonardo da Vinci, and I think that's important. And in the case of this mural, the context is very much not anti-indigenous, and the relationship that the people in the picture had were actually not anti-indigenous. And it's interesting when you study early Canadian history and you study the people that engaged with, like, the first, literal settlers, or even before settlement, the first traders, people like Jacques Cartier and then Champlain and all of these people. Oftentimes they forged incredibly strong relationships with indigenous people. They had a tremendous amount of respect for them, and that respect was reciprocated. And that doesn't mean that attitudes might not have been antiquated by today's standards, but we oftentimes paint indigenous people quite wrongfully as victims when they had agency. They chose to trade, they chose to engage. Remember, these people could have just killed anyone that turned up at their shores, and in some cases that did happen. In some parts of the world that did happen to people that attempted to colonize or settle. But this art is not at all anything to be ashamed of or afraid of, and it's quite despicable that there is a push for that.
No, and in the picture, you have depicted Father Albert Lacombe. Albert Lacombe is of partly indigenous ancestry. He is not
Yeah.
someone who hated the indigenous people. He was one of the first pioneers who came to Alberta, and he actually helped work with the indigenous people. He was a pastor. He was a minister who had worked with the indigenous people. He had shared the word of God with indigenous people who had previously not, been accessed to the word of God. And he was a great friend to a great many indigenous people. In his time, he was a friend of indigenous people. Indigenous people loved him. And in modern times, he is someone who is scorned which is a real shame because it is the erasure of history and is the sort of smearing of someone who cannot, in modern times defend themselves. If he were here to defend himself, he would be able to, say those things. But it is incumbent upon people like us to, spread that his story, to really, correct the facts. And we see the same thing happening to Egerton Ryerson. We see the same thing happening to Dundas, the removal of his name from Yonge and Dundas Square. These people, they can't, from the grave, defend themselves. And we don't have enough good people who are willing to stand up for them, saying, no, these aren't vicious racist people. These are people who, in their own time, tried to do good things, maybe made some mistakes. From researching Father Lacombe, I didn't see anything wrong that he did. He just seemed like a good friend to the Indigenous people and helped to establish would now become Alberta. So I think that it is really destructive when we try to, destroy our history, because that is the foundation upon which Canada was built. And once we destroy the foundation, we can't exactly. We can't continue on as we are continuing now. These activists, they do want to destroy Canada. They do want to destroy the West. They're pretty open about it. But they're doing it one step at a time, and this is one step that they are taking. And I hope that McDougall, Lacombe, and the person who drew this mural, Glide, they have their reputations restored, because right now they are being smeared.
Well, I was going to, and I mean, I always say we have to keep it light, and then you go with Western civilization is being destroyed. But you also had such a mic drop there. There's no point in adding anything onto it. So, all right, we're out of time for the show today. Isaac Lamoureux and Noah Jarvis, catch their work over at tnc.news, including on Daily Brief. I'm Andrew Lawton. Good to see you all. We will I don't even know what I'm saying now. This is the problem with going live to tape. I don't edit that out. I leave my nonsense in. I sounded like Joe Biden there for a second. Anyway. There we go. We can end on a light note. Have a great weekend, everyone. We will talk to you next time. I forgot to do the tagline. I knew that's why I was fumbling. I knew there was something I was forgetting, and I was supposed to say everything you heard was off the record, and I missed it. All right. I'm firing myself from off the record now.
You've caught Biden fever, that's for sure. I think that when Biden, is done with the presidency, we should invite him to, become part of the True North team. See how that'll go over with our donors.
Not well.